We have Scott Hanselman, who's the Partner Program Manager of the Microsoft Developer Division. The title of the talk is DevOps Makes Everyone More Powerful, which I really like the title of that talk already. I'm liking that energy. So we're going to join
Thank you.
Scott
Thank you.
for a demos only tech talk about how DevOps makes us all 10x developers, if that even is a thing that exists. It's the process, I think, is really what we want to talk about. So Scott, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. And appreciate Lena's talk. My friend Lena Hall there giving a fantastic talk. Thank you for that. And thank you, Daniel. You made a funny initial statement there. You said how I mentioned that DevOps makes us all 10x developers, if that's even a thing. And that's actually kind of a theme of what I want to talk about today. I'm going to do a little bit of a different kind of a talk here because it's all about storytelling and about demos. But we hear this term a lot. You hear rockstar developers, 10x developers, and ordinarily I am not a fan of this. I don't think that this exists. Most of the 10x developers that I meet are not very nice. But I've started to realize that we have an opportunity to reclaim that term 10x developer. And in fact, it is DevOps and it is process and it is tooling that can make anyone a more powerful developer. So let me tell you the story about not Microsoft, not Azure, but instead Hanselman International. Hanselman International, and I spelled my name wrong. So I have a blog and I have a podcast and I host them at hanselman.com, and I have for gosh 20 years now. Hanselman. And the blog, the podcast, and the brochureware part of my website are three different individual sites. And here's the homepage, and here's the podcast, which has been going on for 16 years. And I think Lena was actually on the podcast. There's Lena right there. And you can go back and you can see that it's got 800 episodes going back a very long time. And I've always believed that you learn a lot by running your own sites. We all believe that, right? A lot of us work on production sites all day. But when I do my side hustle, that is my blog and my podcast and the stuff that I do as a hobby, it might be running your community website or your children's sports event or your hobby site, whatever it is, you learn a lot from keeping those sites up. And I've been keeping these sites up for 20 plus years. So when I run Hanselman International, which isn't a thing, it's a one-person shop. And this is really important. It's a one-person shop. And I am not a 10x developer as I'm doing this work. But I do want to keep my sites up, and I want to do it in a responsible way. So here's the story. 15 years ago, Microsoft had this program called the MVP program, right? It's the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. Google has Cloud Advocates, and Amazon. These are different influencer programs. And they gave me a free virtual machine. There was a free VM as part of the deal when you are someone in the community. And it's like, hey, here's a free virtual machine. And it was from a company. It wasn't from Microsoft. It was like a third-party company, and they said, "Hey, here's a free VM, free Windows VM." And I want to say it was even 17 years ago because it was running Windows Server 2003, and I think it was like a $35 value. So I said, "This is great, a free virtual machine. It's like free like a puppy." And I decided to put that up on hanselman.com, and I thought that would be super fun to get free hosting. So I get this free hosting, and I put my system up on this host, and I run it happily for a long time. And I run hanselman.com, the blog, and the podcast all on the same machine, kind of alone in the world for many, many years. So then about 4 or 5 years ago, I'm living my life, and I start running out of disk space. And I start getting weird errors. I start getting errors, and they are production level errors. So already you know that I've gotten myself in trouble. I don't have a good pipeline. I don't have a formal setup here. I'm really deploying with FTP. I'm not following the things that I preach and that we know that we should be doing. So I start getting these disk space errors, and then I call the host. Now this is important. This is a host, not a cloud. Sometimes we see those words interchangeable, but in this case, hosting was the traditional. They take a machine, sometimes it's your machine, and they put it in a warehouse somewhere. It doesn't have the elasticity, it doesn't have the control plane that we expect with a quality cloud. It's just a host. And I called them and I said, hey, I'm Scott, I'm a customer, I have this virtual machine, would you give me more disk space? And they say, who are you? They've forgotten me. They don't know who I am. In fact, they have no proof that I've ever had a machine. This is very concerning to me because I'm getting errors. I'm having to remote desktop into production. What a horrible thing that is. I'm remote desktoping into production to delete disk space because I can't write scripts because it's such an old, now 20-year-old operating system, to delete the logs. And I say, hey, can you figure out who I am? Turns out, in the 15, 20 years during this process, the company was sold to another company. They don't know me because I was given a free virtual machine many years ago. I don't have any paperwork. They can't prove anything. And we end up going back and forth. And I prove that it's really their machine and it's really me by showing them, look, when I ping Hanselman.com, it's really me. It's your IP address. So then they send someone into the warehouse to find the computer, to figure out where this virtual machine is. And they call me back and they said, hey, we have a problem. Remember that virtual machine that you thought you had? It was never virtual. It's a physical box. It turns out that not a lot of people took them up on this free virtual machine thing, and they ended up just having a mini tower computer sitting on a shelf under someone's desk. And then when the other company bought it, they inherited this box and they stuck it back in the warehouse and they completely forgot about it. And all these years that I thought I had a VM, I had a computer with a 30 gig hard drive. This isn't just a hard drive like an SSD. This isn't one of these hard drives. This is a 5.25 inch, 5,400 RPM spinning rust. This is a hard drive that you can hear. You can put your ear to the ground and you can hear the thing spin. And there's a thing about hard drives that you might know called the mean time before failure, the MTBF. And the mean time before failure of a hard drive is about 5 years. And at this point, we're 15 in. This is a situation where I bet you if I turned this computer off, it would not turn back on again. When I discovered that this machine was not running in the cloud, was not running virtualized, in fact, all of the backups that I thought I had were lies because they never backed it up because it was never a virtual machine. It was just a lonely box in a corner somewhere. This completely rocked my world. This was shocking. And this accelerated, as you would guess, my move to the cloud. So I had to start thinking really clearly and really quickly about how I was going to get this handled. And I realized in all of these things and all the comedy of errors and all the things that got wrong, the issue here was that I never had a plan. I never had a DevOps loop. I was building on my own machine, deploying maybe once a year with FTP, and I was putting off the formality because I'm thinking to myself, I'm just one person. Now, keep in mind, I started this blog 20 years ago and I started the podcast 16 years ago, so I can give myself excuses for not staying modern. But in this case, it's taking a near crisis for me to go and move to DevOps. Now, what's significant about this is the excuse I'm giving myself is I'm just one person. I don't need this. But in fact, as one person, I need it most of all. I need it most of all because I don't want to live in fear of these systems going down. I have other things in my life I want to worry about, and keeping these machines up should be something that is natural and that is comfortable. So at this point, my hard drive is filling up with logs and it's dying and I'm having issues. And I need to get this thing off the machine quickly. So I run a thing that's called disk to VHD, which takes physical disks and turns them into virtual hard drives. So at this point, at least I have a clone. I have a backup of that, the image that represents that. Now, in moving to the cloud, I could do the naive move, which is called lift and shift, right? We've all heard the term lift and shift, where we simply pick it up, We have that physical machine or that virtual machine, and we put it up in the cloud, and we say, everything's okay now. It's going to be fine. I moved it into the cloud. But remember that I said this was running Windows Server 2003. It was never upgraded. There's security problems. There's TLS, and there's certificate issues. This is a problem. So not only do I have the opportunity for me to move to a formal DevOps workflow, but I could also modernize my code for a bit. I could consider moving to Linux and saving some money on hosting. I could consider doing things in containers. And in doing that, though, I realized that the root issue that I was having with my software was that I was afraid of it. I was afraid to make changes. I was afraid to upgrade it. I didn't have good test coverage. So I needed to figure out not the business problem, but the emotional problem that I had with these three websites, which was I lived in fear of touching them. I didn't want to break anything. So I started and I thought about, what's my move? I need to plan my move. What's my first weapon to be successful here? And I decided that it was DNS. It's always DNS, isn't it? Both your problems and your solution are always going to be DNS. So we had Hanselman.com, and I started by making staging.hanselman.com, and I put Cloudflare in front of it and started thinking about the relationship between the old machine and then whatever is new. I had that image, that virtual disk image, and I could put that up in a VM and put that on the side of staging. But I didn't want to have to think about Windows Server and Windows Update and all that kind of stuff. So I started porting that to Linux. I was using .NET, .NET 6 right now, and .NET 6 is a long-term support release that runs on all the Linuxes. It runs in containers. So I started porting Hanselman.com, the blog, and Hansel Minutes, the podcast, to .NET 6 to enable me to run it in multiple places at once. That was my first thing. Then I looked at the complexity of these systems, and I realized that if I order them via complexity, I can do these things one at a time and then use DNS to test each one. So Hanselman.com is brochureware. I don't know how to spell brochure. Maybe it's spelled like that. And then this is the podcast, and this is the blog. So this is ordered now in complexity. First one is the least complex, and the last one is the most complex. So the brochureware website here is basically the home page. It's got some where I'm speaking and some news. It's got about, it's got links to my newsletter, stuff like that. It's pretty clean, simple site. So moving that over is going to be my test. So then I have a Linux container version of that at Hanselman.com staging, and then I have www. And then using a thing like Cloudflare, and then I eventually moved to a tool called Azure Front Door, which is a reverse proxy that allows me to manage these things based both on DNS and on my paths, allowed me to then start sending traffic to staging. I did 95% to www, the old machine, and I turned it up to 5% on staging, using DNS as the main proving ground for my migration. Remembering that while I'm planning my move, my goal is that the customers, that means everybody on Twitter, don't notice. All this while, I set a goal for myself that I was going to keep these machines up and no one would notice that I was doing this work. So that was super important. Now, in moving it over to Linux, I use here, I'm on Windows 11, and I'm running PowerShell there on the left, but on the right-hand side here, I'm running Ubuntu under WSL. So I want to be able to go and run this on both Linux and on Windows. So I'm doing my local dev work twice. Basically, here we go. I just did a git pull, and then we'll do a .NET build. And I'm making sure that my application will build and run in two places, that it'll build and run on Windows and build and run on Linux, because I want to make sure I have choices. Then I went and containerized it. So now I've got the choice of Windows, Linux on the metal, or running in Docker and containers. And in doing that, I'm feeling more and more and more confident. Then I start putting in things like Selenium tests, playwright test that I'm moving to right now, so that I have some smoke testing, some unit testing, and some integration testing all the way. So now I've got it running on Windows on the left, Ubuntu on the right. That's going to give me a lot more choices about planning this move. So this old machine is the Windows version of the site. It's running on physical hardware that I'm trying to get off of. Staging is now running on Azure. And if I pop over to Azure, there's lots of different ways to go and run these things. I've got these app service plans. These are basically websites. App service plans are allow you to have some number of websites. You see I have 6 apps that are on Windows, and I have 4 here on Linux. Let's click on the Linux apps, and then we'll go and look at those. You see that I've got the blog, the main site, the podcast, and then I also have a show called Azure Friday that I'm running all on the same plan. I want to save as much money as possible, because not only do I want to keep this thing up, but I want to keep it as cheap as possible. And one of the things that the cloud offers, any cloud that's cheaper than perf, is memory. Memory is the cheapest thing that we have. So I do a lot of aggressive caching. You'll see that I have 4 different sites running on the same plan to save money. My CPU performance is low. You can see that it just bursts every once in a while. And then we've got a nice steady state as we're doing our caching. So I'm slowly using that DNS to move things over, and I've proven that Hanselman.com will move nicely. So then I start moving the podcast over, and in doing that, I'm starting to explore containers more. I'll actually pop back over here to Linux, and we'll drop into the podcast site. Again, it's really nice that you can run Linux on Windows, so I can choose between these things. And you'll notice that I've got these scripts here for building and running and testing. I want that inner loop, that developer's inner loop, to be great before I move that into a DevOps loop. And that developer inner loop is how quickly can I make a change and see a change, and make a change and see a change. So that's your inner loop. And then your DevOps loop, of course, is being able to check that change in and then see that respected in production. So I made these scripts here, and these scripts are PowerShell scripts. They're cross-platform, so they run both on Linux, because PowerShell itself is cross-platform, and on Windows. And in doing that, I can go and build my Docker containers and test my Docker containers on any operating system. So I'm here on Ubuntu. Oops. There we go. Oh, now they're mad at me because I don't have PowerShell on this machine. Let me switch back over to here, and we'll try that again from a different location. This is a new build here. There we go. So here I've got my site running on Docker, and I really like the opportunity to put something into Docker because I like running my tests in the Docker container as well. So I do the build in a multi-stage Docker container. I do the testing in the Docker container as well, and that gives me a lot more flexibility. I can push that up anywhere. The other thing that it allows me to do is think about formalizing my own Git, my own relationship with Git, my GitOps, because I want to send pull requests to myself. And in doing that, if the artifact of the build is a Docker container, I can then spin up a container instance. We use a thing called Azure Container Instances. And I can set up a bot inside of GitHub that allows me to have each pull request have its own private instance of that container. So not only then do I have staging.hanselman.com, which is whatever I'm doing that's new, I can have PR1 or PR154.staging.hanselman, which is going to be whatever pull request is currently being validated. So I've got a nice inner loop because I can test Linux and Windows on the same machine. Then I push that up into GitHub, spin that thing up with something like GitHub Actions, and then I drop in a bot drops in a comment that says, "Go check out that container, that pull request right now running in staging," and then I can roll it forward to actual staging. And then as I start to do my DNS, my weighted DNS from like 95.5 and start changing it to like 2080, as I start to see if this new site is going to pick up the load, this becomes even more valuable because I'm not feeling afraid anymore. I'm not honestly, I'm not directly deploying into production. So many of us, even now in 2022, are doing, I've seen it all the time with customers, FTP, right-click publish directly into production and crossing their fingers. And I had been doing that 20 years ago, and in moving to a more formal system, that was enabling me to do much better things. So when I realized that I was afraid of my system, I had to ask myself, what are the reasons why? Didn't have enough test coverage, fix that. Didn't have a good way to validate my pull request, fix that. But I also realized that sometimes I wasn't sure what I was running in production. And I think this is a really common thing that we see. You go, well, what's running in production? And I don't mean the version of stuff. I mean, what commit hash is running in production? So what I ended up doing, if we scroll all the way down to one of my websites at the very, very, very bottom, is I actually burn my commit hashes and my build log details directly into the resulting production website. So this is something I do. You might want to hide that behind an administrator login. You don't necessarily want to put the version out there for the public, but for me, it's fine. For you, it might be if is admin, then show that. But what this means is I can see on my podcast site, for example, that we're running a specific runtime version of .NET 6 deployed from a specific commit. And I can actually see the build log. So we can see in March 11th, a couple months ago, that was the last time I deployed to here, which means then I can right click on that and we'll go and look at the actual Git. Look at that. There's the actual, apparently it was just a white space change and a small layout. So I changed how my service worker did, and I can go directly to the commit in GitHub that is live in production right now. So I never have a sense of fear about what's happening. Then I can click on the build and see here the exact log, how long it took, when it ran, if there's any warnings or what's going on. Clicking on the actual job, see the tests that ran. I have tests that check whether or not we're in Docker. All of this stuff, even from months ago, I can see. Now, in this example, I'm using Azure DevOps. The same concepts apply to GitHub Actions. I tend to mix and match and use whichever one makes me happy at the time. I'm using Azure DevOps right now. They're free. You can use GitHub Actions, but the concept is the same. And I've written blog posts about how to do this with .NET. But I think that the idea, I'll go to the blog and show you that as well, is a strong one. Because at this point now, I don't have any sense of fear about how that build went, what's there, and the ability to roll it back has been a lot cleaner as well. All of that's, in the case of the .NET application, burned directly into the resulting DLL. The same thing can be possible in Ruby or in Node as well. And I've got blog posts on that where I put the Git hash directly in there. One of the great things about having a blog for so long is it allows you to go and Google for yourself later. So if I ever forget how I did that, I can go back and read about how to do that. And you can see here, I'm just building out the URL with the Git hash here and with the build ID, which is now inside of this runtime DLL, this runtime library that I'm using. Again, this is not .NET specific. It's just kind of a DevOps concept that I find to be really useful. And then in doing that, I again reduce the amount of fear and allow me to be more powerful. Remember, Hanselman International, it's just one person. And this is what's so great about starting to be more formal. I started with DNS. I started to plan my move. I used DNS as my front door. I used those reverse proxies. I used those Cloudflares and those Azure front doors to allow me to dip my toe in the water of this upgrade. Then I used the power of containers, which again, available to everyone for free. It's just a matter of thinking about it and planning it out, which then allows me to have individual containers spun up for each pull request for my application. Then when I okay it, I can move it forward. And then the other thing that a lot of people don't realize, and I mentioned this about Cloudflare and Azure Front Door, is many sites still think one URL equals one site, or one top level domain rather equals one site, but splitting it out so that sub microservices, sub URL paths can be individual sites is not intuitive to as many people as you would think. So Right now, Hanselman.com points to something like, I don't know, Hanselman Linux. Let's go here, .azure websites. Remember, this was all on one machine in the past, okay? And then the podcast is on another website. And then in the past, these would have been the same sites. Again, might be intuitive to you all, but not to a lot of customers who really don't feel in control of their URLs. They don't feel in control of their DNS. People who have been doing this for a long time understand these things. But when you put a reverse proxy in front of a site, you give yourself so much more power. And that's kind of the single thing that an individual developer can do to make themselves more powerful. So by putting /blog on a totally different location, it's given me the ability to scale differently as well. If I switch over to Azure and go to Azure Front Door, which again is kind of like a Cloudflare reverse proxy here, and we go and look at that front door, that front door literally is the front door to my application. So we have staging, which I'm currently not using because I've done my migration. We've got the top level canonical or naked domain, and then we've got our www domain, and then we've got an extra one I use for other reasons, and then individual backend pools. So then I've got routing rules that allow me to say something simple like, if you're going to the blog, we're going to route you from this front end to this back end. A lot of people just put their container or put their application straight out on the internet. And when I was doing that originally, Hanselman.com pointed directly at a Windows machine on the open internet. By putting a front door, by putting a reverse proxy in front of it, not only do I get the ability to play with my DNS and have all kinds of fun, not only do I get the ability to have different pathing and different routing rules, but I can also then put a web-based firewall in front of that and catch script kiddies and all kinds of stuff like that. The other thing that I like about my move from my older stuff into the cloud is the feeling of control and power as a single individual when I start instrumenting the site. So before, it was kind of just log files, right? We've all seen this, that observability starts with log files, but it really comes when the information in the log files gets unlocked. So in this case, I put a thing called application insights in front of it and made a dashboard. And I always thought this was cool because I would go and visit startups. And I always thought a startup was really the most impressive when you walk into their lobby and they had a flat screen TV up on the wall. And that flat screen TV had like a map of the earth and like a pin of all the different countries that they were in. You know, sometimes with startups, it's just all the different Starbucks that they've been to or all the different restaurants. So for me, it's just like where I've traveled. I don't actually have offices anywhere. I'm only here in my house. But when I made a dashboard as a little company, I was like, wow, that's cool. The dashboard made it real. Like here I can see I have 179 users on my website right now, and I have some failed requests. That would have been locked inside of a log file just a few years back. I can see an interesting thing going on here where I have an average response time that's really just a few milliseconds, but I have an unusual moment here where this is popping up. It looks like every couple of days. Is that a cache expiring? Is that what is causing that latency? It's still not bad, but it's a heartbeat, so I could go and figure that out. Those kind of questions would be solved in the past by digging through log files, but now I could go like this, just select that, click on it. Let's go find out what some of these failures are. Here's one that looks a little bit weird. It looks like okay, it looks like 30 people are getting a 400 error on the site right now. All I had to do was put it into the cloud to get this information. I can click on this post here, find out what's going on. Looks like somebody, oh, look at that. Someone is trying to do some attacking or something. Some script kiddie is assuming I have PHP. So this looks like it's just someone being naughty. They're posting to a route that does not exist. And then I always look at this. Look at this. What a wonderful, wonderful thing here. All available telemetry 5 minutes before and after. As a person who's been in tech now for 30 years, the idea of going and collecting all the telemetry before and after by digging through log files is insane. To be able to do that now with some of the wonderful tools that we have from not just Microsoft, from all of our partners that allow you to explore, how did this person move through this system? What did they do? Can we group these results? Did they have a path through the system? Was there an ongoing individual path? And if I looked at that path, can I explore the timeline in which they went through that moment? Being able also to go and look at a dashboard that represents the site itself. Again, just by putting it into the cloud, it unlocks this kind of stuff, thereby making me as an individual more powerful. So I can go and look at either live metrics or an application map. I love the application map. Check this out. I can see that the site is up. I can see that there's a certain number of views in the last little while. I can see this instrumentation across both client and server by simply putting it up into the cloud and then exploring how it moves and the calls that it makes on client and server. This would have been the kind of stuff that would have required a consultant to come in and install. It would involve extra licenses. But we now, the individual one person, the one man or woman shop, can have technology like this available to us. And it's usually built in. It's built into the fee that you're paying for putting your stuff in the cloud. So I went from a spinning Rust physical machine that was running in a warehouse somewhere to containers and then throwing them up into the cloud, taking control of my DNS, taking control of my URLs, then getting free dashboards, free insights, free log analytics. And by free, I mean freely available, like I now have power to answer questions that I did not have before. I have global availability testing and a dashboard that I can then share with other people. All of that is now available to me. I have free builds in the cloud on both GitHub or Azure DevOps. And most importantly, I'm no longer afraid of what is running in production. All of this makes me feel, to our point from the beginning of this talk, is I feel like a 10x developer. And remember, I still reject that idea. Like, we're all amateurs, we're all learning. I don't like the idea of a 10x developer, but the tooling, the processes make me feel like that. And I want everybody else to feel that powerful as well. So I could ramble on for a little bit longer, but I'm going to go ahead and bring our friend back from Datadog, and maybe we'll have a brief chat as I get towards the end of my talk here. And I want to encourage everyone, of course, to scan the QR code there at the bottom and make a donation, and appreciate all of our wonderful friends and sponsors that have joined us today. And thank you for the opportunity to speak here.
Well, thank you so
Hey,
much
Daniel.
for that. That was really fun. Yeah, I wasn't sure what to expect when it said demo heavy. I was like, oh, where are we going with this? That was really. I've not seen a presentation done that way before. That was a lot of fun. So thank you for that.
I
Um,
appreciate you sticking with it.
yeah, for sure. So I was looking at the comments as we were going through here, and a lot of people I think are feeling the retro vibes from the story you were telling.
We've all
Finding
been there,
dusty
but we
old
don't talk
machines
about
in
those
there.
things. We don't talk about those things. I think that people see an idealized view of our influencers and our friends on Twitter, and I'm that person too, right? We tell a good story, but we all have an old car in our garage that really needs to be fixed up. And in this case here, I thought it was appropriate to show that I wasn't maintaining my own house while I was out talking about buying new houses. And in this case here, I got through it, but I did it with a plan and with as many free tools as I could get away with.
Yeah, which is always fun, right? Exactly. So I'll certainly give the audience some time if they'd like to submit some questions. I of course was taking down some notes here, and one of the things you said at the very beginning, and it really stuck with you, was it's always DNS. And I feel
Yeah.
like it's always one of those things where you're like, no, it's not DNS, it's this, and then you go, no, it wasn't that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not DNS, it's this, and then finally, okay, we've Occam razored everything.
Yeah.
Right? Why didn't we just look at DNS in the first place? And I'm curious if you have any insight into how our friends out there can help debug DNS related issues, because in some ways it's so simple, and in other ways it's a completely black art.
Yeah, it really is. I think DNS is both, much maligned with the "it's always DNS" joke, but in this case, it's also a huge opportunity to do cool stuff. And I think that understanding DNS is one of these fundamental things that people need to learn. One of the analogies that I like to use a lot is you might ride in a taxi, you might drive a taxi, you might own your own car, you might take the bus. None of those things require you to know how to drive a manual shift car or change your own oil. But if you learn even once or twice, change your oil, change a tire, maybe drive a stick shift, a manual shift car for once, it will make you a better Uber rider, a better Lyft driver, a better person. So if you're a web dev, if you're a DevOps person who doesn't, just read the HTTP spec for a weekend and then maybe try some unusual things with DNS. There's life beyond just A records and C names. I'm not saying know everything, but I am saying take a moment, take a week, and say, this is the week of DNS for me. I'm going to learn about NS lookup. I'm going to learn about the different tools out there, whether they be Azure Front Door or Cloudflare or whatever. And I'm going to think about, have I been using DNS effectively on my sites? And is there any trickery that I could potentially go to, whether it be something basic like round robin DNS or something more interesting around a reverse proxy that is allowing you to drain connections on or off a particular container. All of that just involves some intentionality, I think.
For sure. And it's only a hop, skip, and a jump from there to writing your own distributed messaging system based on PKI implemented entirely in DNS, because I certainly have never done that.
I
But
do want
these
to
are,
add one thing though, if I may. Sometimes when an old person on the internet like me says something like "you need to go deeper," it can come off as gatekeepy. What I'm intending to do is I think you should think about intentionally where you live and go one layer below your comfort zone. I don't think you need to go all the way to assembly language. I'm just saying that a web developer who knows a little about HTTP or a person that does microservices and knows a little about DNS will feel more powerful. And in this journey, even though I knew a lot of these things already, you learn more by teaching, as you know, and you become better at it by reinforcing these concepts. And I think that it's not gatekeeping to encourage people to just explore the internals of the systems that we use every day.
yeah, for sure, 100% on board with that. And DNS in particular is so clutch, especially in this world of, Kubernetes and service message and like layer 7 routing and stuff like this. We sort of forget that there's this one thing that it all relies on at the end of the day, right? So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
You mentioned another thing here, which I thought was very interesting. You mentioned the developer inner loop and it being part of the DevOps loop. I like the way that you frame that, right? This idea of there's a concentricity, if that's a word, that's involved there. Do you have any sort of ideas on, are there other loops that we should consider in sort of the larger DevOps loop, or is the DevOps loop
Yeah.
itself maybe part of a super loop, if you will?
Right. That's a great point. So, life in my mind is a series of repetitive actions, and then we decide whether or not we want to make the repetitive stuff fun or whether we want to automate it. So, everybody today is going to eat a couple of times, hopefully. We're all going to stand up and we're going to walk around. We're going to go to the bathroom. We're going to do all these things. And some of those things are boring. In development, there's a lot of tedium. And the number one thing that we have available to us as developers to make the boring parts less boring is automation. So when I say the developer's inner loop, how much administrivia, right? Administrative trivia for our non-English speakers. How much administrivia is there between the moment when I finished typing my HTML tag and seeing it in production? If you find yourself, oh, I had to hit Control S and then Alt Tab and then Control R and then wait a little bit, what can I automate? What can I remove? That's the inner loop of the developer. How much can I go? How quickly can I go from thought to public URL? That's when we start getting into the developer inner loop and then the DevOps inner loop. So then we think about early in career people and how they must feel when they take production down. We all have a story about taking production down, but we never talk about the fact that it was a process error that allowed an early in career person to take down production. It's a DevOps problem. We shouldn't make them feel bad. We should actually include them and the whole team as part of the what part of the loop failed here? What repetitive process did we either become complacent about? Did we not have planned out enough? What did we do that allowed you to be made to feel that way? And then how can we automate it and make you go back to doing the fun stuff? And that's where unit testing in the cloud, PRs that turn into containers that people can then validate. That's where things like Playwright and automated web testing become really, really fun.
Yeah, for sure. As an old school Perl monger, I definitely feel the whole, being lazy as the path to success, right? I mean, that's the sort of the fundamental element of automating things, right? Is, I'm lazy. I don't want to have to do this by hand. Let's just let the computer do what the computer does so I can concentrate on what the human does best, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely feeling that. I like the idea here as well. You mentioned using, referencing your own blog to solve your own problems. And that's, it's nice to have that element of record. I reference my blog in the same way over time, but it also speaks, I think, to something that's a bit more fundamental and something we've touched on here at DevOps Days Ukraine over the past couple of days, and that is preserving context, preserving information, preserving why decisions were made and how decisions were made, so that you can communicate that to the future. Even if the future is just yourself again. When you are thinking about you as the one man shop, quote unquote, that there's a scale difference there between you as the partner program manager at Microsoft, for example. But are there any parallels or differences between how you would choose to store and transmit information for future you or for future iterations?
That's a great point. I would say that there's direct parallels and there's no difference between a 100,000 person company and a one person company because it's all about writing things down culture. If it's not written down, it doesn't exist, right? Code comments are one thing, but also what is the intentionality of our team and our team culture and our technical culture written in some way? That could be a Word document that describes how to build the thing, or it could be a really great YAML that goes and has a sophisticated GitHub Actions that builds the thing. But the whole point is repeatability. So where's the intellectual property? If it's in anyone's head, if the project has a high bus factor, you know the bus factor, right, Daniel? What happens if somebody gets hit by a bus? Then the project fails. Well, write stuff down. You're not going to remember it. You're not going to always be there. The team needs that. So I write this stuff down for myself. I actually had a client call me from a project in 2003, and I had to go and dig it out of CVS, not Subversion and not Mercurial, but I had to go to a CVS and had to find the source code for a 19-year-old project. But I had a readme.txt written to future Scott. And was able to go and build that, right? That's the feeling you want to have. Remember that I was talking about fear. If you are afraid of any part of your process, if you are afraid of any portion of your software, what can you write down to make people not fear it? No
Right.
matter
No,
how
that's
big your shop
fair.
is.
Reducing fear and increasing confidence, right? That's really the should be a prioritizing element for any sort of decision making. Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you so much. Super appreciate you coming through, preparing this really entertaining format for us, regaling us with your tales of system administration daring do. Would really like to continue this conversation. There's going to be some open spaces coming up, so perhaps that'll be a good opportunity. But for now, we're going to call it a day. Thank you so much, Scott, for coming through again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.